So in today's video, we're going to do a year-by-year analysis of what you should pay for each model of MacBook Pro starting in 2009. So I've had a bunch of people, either in my comments section, my email, or in my subreddit, asking what fair prices are for certain model of MacBook Pros that they're looking to buy. So what I thought I would do is make a centralized list where I'm going to talk about every single MacBook Pro model starting in 2009 and going all the way up to the present. So what I did was I went through eBay, I looked at sold listings, I looked at active listings, I looked on Craigslist, and I looked on Amazon, although Amazon is a little less helpful, to find what fair prices are, what the most common prices are, and also I adjusted a few things to account for different specifications and different, condition for individual laptops. So the figures that I'm going to outline in today's video are ballpark figures. They're not set in stone, and they can be higher or lower than the figures that I'm giving you today. Now, I can't tell you exactly what you should pay for each individual MacBook Pro, but hopefully with these figures you'll be able to tell if you're kind of in the right range. So reasons for varying from these price ranges are obviously different spec levels within a model. So for example, a 15-inch MacBook Pro in late 2013 can have several different levels of specifications. Some have more storage, more RAM, some have dedicated graphics, some don't. So I have accounted for those variations in specifications in my price range. So what's up to you is to determine where your MacBook falls in that price range based on the specifications that it has. Now, I'll do my best to detail those when I get to each model, but as a general rule of thumb, lower spec models fall on the lower end of the price spectrum, and higher spec models will hit the top end. Another thing to keep in mind is that 2009, 10, 11, and 12 were the years where unibody MacBook Pros were made. Unibody MacBook Pros have a lot of different upgrade paths that Retina MacBook Pros don't have. You can do dual hard drives, you can change the RAM, you can put in SSDs, hard drives, a mix of the two. You've got normal glossy displays and high resolution displays. There's a lot of stuff that can be changed about unibodies, so if you have a unibody that has been upgraded a lot or is in really good condition, it is feasible for it to exceed the price range that I have listed. Okay, so with that out of the way, the format for this video is going to be chronological. I'm going to start with 2009 and go 13, 15, 17, and then 2010, 13, 15, 17, so on and so forth until we get to the most recent used MacBook Pros that you'll find. So I'm going to have a timestamp for the year that I'm talking about, as well as the size of a computer that I'm talking about, and that is going to be on every single frame, and I have a table of contents down below if you want to just skip ahead to each particular year. Okay, so let's start with 2009. 2009 was the first year where Apple introduced the 13-inch MacBook Pro. So these are the lowest specification MacBook Pro 13 inches that you can buy, and as such, you shouldn't pay any more than $150 to $250 for them depending on the specifications. Now, if you have models with 8 gigs of RAM and SSDs, you can expect to hit the top end of that, the 250, maybe even a little more than that if it's in really, really good shape. But for a base trim with a standard hard drive, I really wouldn't exceed $200. Moving up to the 15-inch, I would pay about $200 to $300 for these. These models have Core 2 Duos, unlike all the other 15-inch MacBook Pros in this list. So really, $300 is the max I would pay for one of those Core 2 Duo equipped 15-inch MacBook Pros. The 17-inch, on the other hand, being more desirable, being larger, having a higher resolution screen, a couple different factors, those usually go for $300 to $400. Now you have to be careful when shopping for 17-inch MacBook Pros because they are in high demand, so there are a lot of people with very inflated prices, and you'll probably see a lot of MacBook Pros in the $500 range, even from 2009. I would try, if you can, to do $300 to $400 because keep in mind that these still have Core 2 Duos in them. Alright, and now we're moving on to 2010, and we have a few changes to the MacBook Pro lineup. The 15 and 17-inch MacBook Pros were upgraded to feature Core i5 and i7 processors. One important thing to keep in mind is that for 2010 these were dual-core processors, so even though it says Core i7, it will be a dual-core. So starting with the 13-inch, these fall into a similar price range to the 2009 because the performance upgrades aren't all that significant aside from better graphics and slightly faster Core 2 Duos. So I would pay $175 to $275 for a 13-inch from this time period. And you can stray a little above $275 if you've got such features as upgraded RAM and SSDs. Now, moving on up to the 15-inch, I would pay about $300 to $400 for these. So $300 would be the Core i5 equipped models. Keep in mind that that's an 8-year-old laptop with a dual Core i5 first generation. Most of those are going to have 4 gigabytes of RAM and some mechanical hard drive. So for that, I'd stay on the low end, around $300. If you've got stuff with Core i7, you've got upgraded RAM, a 1 terabyte hard drive, maybe an SSD, then you can hit the $400 mark pretty easily. Now, the 17-inch from this time period is pretty desirable because it's one of the only 17-inch laptops that is fairly reliable and also fairly well-performing. I'll touch on the reliability in a second, but for the most part it's due to the 2011 17-inch MacBook Pros being afflicted with the graphics card defect. So 2010 is a pretty good year because you've got Core i5 and i7 performance, but you also have a graphics card that's less likely to fail. So for that reason, those fall into about $400 to $550. So now we're going to move on to 2011, and we have some pretty significant changes to the MacBook Pro lineup. On the 15 and 17-inch MacBook Pros, we are now upgraded to quad-core Core i7s. There are no more Core i5s and no more dual cores in this year. And the 13-inch also sees an upgrade. We have ditched the Core 2 Duos and we're moving up to dual-core i5 and i7 processors. Now, for both early and late 2011s, we are running second-generation Sandy Bridge processors. The only difference between the early and the late 2011 is going to be in the clock speed and a few minor changes to the graphics card lineup on 15 and 17-inch models. So, starting with the 13-inch, I personally think that these are the best budget MacBook Pros because you have the extra power of running Core i5 and i7 processors, which are much better than the Core 2 Duos in the 2010 and 2009 models, and also they're more modern and they will likely be supported for longer in macOS. Despite all of this, the 13 inches are still relatively affordable. I would pay about $250 to $350. You can push that to $400-ish if you've got SSDs and Core i7 models. Moving up to the 15-inch. These usually fetch about $400 to $500 depending on the spec level. However, I would recommend staying away from the 15 and 17-inch models from 2011, both years, because of the crippling graphics card defect. I don't think it's worth it. There's a pretty good chance that you'll have graphics card failure on your hand and you'll be out a ton of money, so I would just stay away. That being said, the 17-inch usually fetch about $550 to $750, even as much as $1,000 when people put crazy amounts of storage and 16 gigs of RAM in them. But again, stay away from all of the 2011 dual graphics models. Just for practicality reasons, they're not reliable enough to be a recommended buy. Alright, moving on to 2012, we have some interesting changes to the lineup because 2012 saw the introduction of the Retina MacBook Pro. So the 17-inch MacBook Pro was discontinued, and we have a 13 and 15-inch unibody as well as a 13 and 15-inch Retina. We also see an upgrade to third-generation Ivy Bridge processors, which are faster and a little more efficient. So for the 2012 13-inch, I would pay about $300 to $500. Now, the $500 should be able to get you a Core i7, and $300 should be able to get you the base specification. So that's the 2.5 GHz Core i5, 4 GB of RAM, and a 500 GB hard drive. The 15-inch unibodies from this year are very desirable, so they have pretty decent prices. Usually these go for about $450 to $650. So on the high end of that, the $650, I would expect to see the upgraded 2.6 GHz processor, as well as having some sort of a RAM upgrade at least 8 gigabytes, as well as maybe a hard drive upgrade from the 750. Moving up to the Retina, we have a 13-inch that came in at the end of 2012. Those fetch about $500 to $600. And the 15-inch models go for about $600 to $700 depending on the specification. So the 15-inch models from this year are known to have some issues with the graphics card, similar to the 2011, but not as prevalent. So if possible, I would spring and jump up to the late 2013 models, because the mid-2012 Retinas and the early 2013 Retinas can develop graphics card issues. So now we're moving into 2013, and a little bit into 2013, Apple discontinued the 15-inch unibody MacBook Pro, while the 13-inch held on all the way up until 2016, but is still the 2012 model year. As far as new models, we have two different generations of MacBook Pro. There's the early and the late 2013 models. So there are actually some pretty significant differences between these models. The early 2013 Retina MacBook Pros share the Ivy Bridge processors with the mid-2012s. They're incremental updates with things like clock speed, and that's pretty much it. So for the early 2013 models, I would stick to a similar price bracket of $500 to $600 for a 13-inch and $600 to $700 for a 15-inch. And my same warning for the 15-inch applies, which is that they would be best to be avoided just because of those potential graphics card issues. The prices can be a little bit above what the 2012s fetch, just because the clock speeds are increased, the processors are ever so slightly faster because of that. So the prices are ever so slightly higher, but I really wouldn't pay too much extra. Now, moving on to the late 2013, we have a pretty significant update in the MacBook Pro lineup. So the first major change is we're ditching Ivy Bridge processors and we're moving on to 4th generation Haswell chips. So the 13-inch I would pay $600 to $700 for, depending on the specifications. The most common ones you'll find are Core i5s, 8 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabyte SSD. Those should be right around the $600 mark. As you increase storage, maybe move to i7s, then you can creep up into the $700 range. The 15-inch also has two very different models, because on earlier 15-inch MacBook Pros, they all came with the dual graphics configuration. However, in late 2013, this changed in favor of a base model that features 8 gigabytes of RAM and no dedicated graphics, so running Intel Iris Pro graphics, and a higher tier model which has 16 gigabytes of RAM, as well as an NVIDIA GeForce 750M. So for the models that don't have dedicated graphics, I would stay down towards $700. If you have dual graphics, those tend to fetch around $900. So the range would be $700 to $900. Alright, and the next year is 2014. This was a bit of an uneventful year for Apple, as we see only incremental updates from 2013. We're using the same graphics cards, and we're using the same 4th generation Haswell chips, which saw a minor increase in clock speed. Additionally, all models of the 15-inch MacBook Pro are now featuring 16 gigabytes of RAM as opposed to the 8, which was on the starting model in late 2013. However, the 13-inch MacBook Pro didn't really see any significant changes, so the price range stays the same at $600 to $700. For the 15-inch, the price range moves up ever so slightly. I'd put it at $750 to $950. So moving on to 2015, this year is when we introduce Force Touch trackpads to the mix. The 15-inch also sees new graphics cards by AMD, and the 13-inch sees 5th generation Broadwell processors, while the 15-inch stays with 4th generation Haswell chips. Now, the 13-inch models from this year are still very desirable and fetch about $700 to $900. Obviously, the most common one is the Core i5, 8 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabyte hard drive. That should pull you right in at $700. Moving up to the 15-inch, we still have those two different configurations, so one without dedicated graphics and one with dedicated graphics. The ones without dedicated graphics are fetching about $900, where the ones with dedicated graphics can go all the way up to about $1,300. One other thing to note is that the 2015 model without dedicated graphics is still currently in production, so some of them are very, very new. Alright, and moving on to 2016, we have some very significant changes because we are now moving to 6th generation Skylake. We've got the new generation Touch Bar MacBook Pros, the new design, the butterfly keyboard, all of that goodness. So 13-inch MacBook Pros from 2016 range quite a bit. There were a lot of variations in models for this. You have on the low end the 13-inch without a touch bar, 128 gigabytes of storage. Those are going for about $950. And you can move all the way up to Core i7s, touch bars, 1 terabyte SSDs. Those are on the $1,500 range. And the 15-inch models are about $1,450 all the way up to $2,000 for some really spec'd out models. Now the 2017 models are much newer, so their prices can fluctuate quite a bit depending on who you're buying it from. But generally, the 13-inch can fall in the $1,000 to $1,600 range, while the 15 inches tend to fall in the $1,550 to $2,500 range. Now keep in mind, the high-end prices for the 2016 and 17 models are mainly because there are such amenities as 1 terabyte SSDs that are becoming more and more common in these more recent generations. Alright, and that does it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions that I didn't talk about in this video, as I was trying to give a pretty decent overview, but I can't go into as much detail as I'd like to. So if you do have any questions, head over to my subreddit. We've got a bunch of people there that are willing to help you out in buying your next MacBook Pro, and I will see you guys in the next video.